You know, I was wondering the same thing. What happened to Ice Spice? Okay, this video is by Blackie Speaks. It's your boy Dway's on. Please like, comment, and subscribe, please.
Now, if you've paid attention to the music industry long enough, you've probably seen a story that goes something like this. Someone appears out of nowhere. One song, one moment, one viral clip, and suddenly they're everywhere. Their name is going viral online, their face is next to every major artist, and then just as quickly as it all started, the noise dies down. Ice Spice was that story. Born Isis Gaston on January 1st, 2000, in the Bronx, New York, Ice Spice went from working as a cashier at Wendy's and folding clothes at the Gap to performing alongside Taylor Swift and landing a record on the Barbie soundtrack. All of that happened within roughly 2 years, but looking back now, the question was never really whether she could rise, because she did get it popping and she did eventually become a success. The question was always whether any of it was built to last.
The faster they rise, the faster they fall.
Attended Sacred Heart High School in Yonkers before enrolling at the State University of New York at Purchase, where she studied communications and played volleyball. By her sophomore year, she had dropped out, and then she went back to the Bronx, took on a range of jobs to support herself, and became the primary figure in the lives of her younger siblings, the eldest of 5. Music had always been something she gravitated towards, and college was where she began to take it more seriously. It was in college that she met Ephraim Louis Lopez Jr., known in the music industry as Riot, a producer with real ties to the music industry through his father, DJ Enough, a Brooklyn-born DJ and radio personality who had been working at Hot 97 since 1998, and that connection of course mattered. Because Riot wasn't just talented, he had proximity to the industry in a way most independent producers didn't, okay? So he was the plug for sure. The two of them built a tight working relationship that would become the foundation of everything that followed. In March 2021, Ice Spice released her debut track, Bully Freestyle. A video of her participating in the viral Busted Challenge then gained traction on Twitter and put her name in circulation for the first time. She followed that up with a few other records that gained traction on SoundCloud, which took her to the next major step. And that came on August 10th, 2022, when she dropped the song Munch. Munch was distributed by Worldstar Hip Hop and quickly went viral on social media. Within weeks, Ice Spice had become one of the most talked about new artists on the internet, not just because of the song, but because of a single line within it.
You thought I was feeling you? That nigga Munch.
That line became a soundbite. Millions of people used it in their TikTok videos. All the biggest hip-hop platforms started posting about her. Her stream surged, and Drake also hopped in them DMs on Instagram, of course. 1 month later, in September 2022, she signed a record deal with 10K Project under the umbrella of Capitol Records, and now the industry machine had officially taken notice and invested in her. At this point, she wasn't just a viral moment anymore. She had the backing, the marketing budget, and the infrastructure most artists spend years trying to access. But she was still largely unknown on a personal level, a name with a face but not yet a personality. People recognized her instantly, especially for the bright orange curls that became a part of her image, but they didn't really know her. That changed when she appeared on a stream with Kai Cenat, an hour-long stream that gave the public something they hadn't had yet, a sense of who she actually was. She came across as easygoing, likable, approachable, the kind of person people felt comfortable rooting for. That stream was more valuable than any press run she could have done at the time. And then after that, she performed at Rollin' Loud, which became one of the most scrutinized moments of her early career. People criticized the stage presence and said that it wasn't there, and that the performance was rough. But given how new she was, and how fast she had actually risen, people extended her grace because at the end of the day, she was only a few months into her career. In the months that followed, she released Bikini Bottom, which caught traction the same way Munch had. Once again, it was a specific line that caught people's attention. How can I lose if I'm already chose? That became the viral moment. She had a formula at this point, and it was working. Then came the song In Her Mood, which was the final single leading up to her debut EP. On January 2023, the EP dropped 6 songs, 3 of them which had already been released at that point. It did 15,000 units in its first week, debuted at number 13 on the top rap albums chart, and landed at number 37 on the Billboard 200. For an artist that the world had barely even known existed a few months before, those were pretty decent numbers. In the months that followed, she linked up with UK artist Pink Pantheress for Boy's a Liar Part 2. The song peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Hot 100, the biggest chart moment of her career at that point. Then came the Barbie movie soundtrack, placing her at the center of one of the most mainstream cultural movies of 2023. Shortly after that, she appeared on the remix of Taylor Swift's Karma, a collaboration that debuted at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100. Within just a few months, she had secured multiple top 10 records, something most artists never accomplish in their entire career. Around that time, she publicly described Taylor Swift as a mentor, someone she spoke to regularly and received advice from behind the scenes. She also credited Nicki Minaj for encouraging her to learn from experience and pay attention to the mistakes that come with fame. By this point, Ice Spice had collected cosigns from some of the biggest names in the entire music industry. She had performed alongside them. She had charted with them. She had been inserted into major cultural moments that extended far beyond hip-hop, and all this happened within roughly a year of Munch going viral. At nearly 40 million monthly listeners on streaming platforms, her numbers reflected the machine that had been built around her. The marketing dollars were significant. The visibility was almost impossible to escape, and her massive social media presence had grown into something very few artists at her stage could say they've got. But there was a level of fragility underneath, one that wasn't obvious yet, but that would become clear very soon. Part of what had driven her appeal from the very beginning went beyond the music. Ice Spice was, based on societal beauty standards, widely considered an attractive young woman. Combine that with her being racially ambiguous, meaning you couldn't immediately place her into one clear racial category at first glance, and it expanded how she could be positioned, especially from a marketing standpoint. She was light-skinned, with a figure that she and her team leaned into deliberately and consistently. Her brand was built around sexuality, the twerking, the visual presentation, the playful but provocative aesthetic. The signature tongue-out expression became a big part of her image.
This thing never lasts, bro.
The projection of a very specific persona, very sexual one. None of it was accidental. It was intentional. And it was effective because we all know that sex definitely sells. Colorism also played a
until they find somebody else to buy it from.
Role that was hard to ignore. Lighter-skinned black women in hip-hop have historically received greater industry support in the music industry, more marketing resources, and more mainstream visibility, and Ice Spice was no exception. Her look aligned closely with Eurocentric beauty standards in a way that made her easier to market broadly. And that's not a personal critique, it's a structural reality. At the same time, her personality worked in her favor. She came across as genuine and unguarded in interviews and on camera, and because of that, combined with her appearance, she benefited from what's often described as the halo effect. When someone is perceived as attractive, people tend to automatically attach other positive traits to them, whether it's kindness, talent, authenticity, even if those traits haven't necessarily been proven, because there's no correlation between how good someone looks and how good of a person they are.
And everybody thinks I'm a mean person, so what does that say about how I look?
Dynamic is also often referred to as the physical attractiveness stereotype or pretty privilege. Ice Spice brand also spoke to a very specific demographic. Young girls, the visual language around her, the bright colors, pink aesthetic, a playful and sensual energy was aimed specifically to capture that audience. A lot of young girls wanted to emulate her look. They wanted her confidence and they wanted her presence. And of course, alongside that demographic, a large male audience drawn in by the same image for different reasons. In that way, both groups were being served and both were being engaged. This was the architecture of her success. Not talent alone, but a very calculated combination of industry support, physical appeal, social likability, and cultural timing. Now, at some point at the end of 2023, momentum began to slow down. Her monthly listeners dropped from nearly 40 million to around 15 million within the span of a single year. The chart placements that had come so easily during her peak became harder to sustain, and the conversation around her success had started to shift toward another direction. In January 2024, she teased a song called Fart, meant to be the
remember when she was being a mean girl, what goes around comes around,
lead single for her upcoming album Y2K. The soundbite went viral on TikTok, and then when the full song dropped, it debuted at number 37 on the Billboard Hot 100. But the following week, it dropped to 52, then 93. Within a month and 22 days of its release, it had left the chart entirely. The singles that followed it performed similarly. Her popularity was diminishing by the second, and the novelty of her brand was disappearing. Basically, the music wasn't doing enough on its own to compensate for that loss in momentum. On July 26, 2024, she released her debut studio album Y2K, 10 songs, 23 minutes. For a debut album, a moment that for most artists represent the fullest and most complete statement of who they are, it was kind of short, and the reception reflected that. The general public and even many of her existing fans considered it underwhelming. The album did 28,000 units in its first week. Not really catastrophic numbers on its own, but deeply underwhelming given the scale of the investment that had been made in her career.
Why didn't they make her the Little Mermaid? She looks more like Ariel than what's DDG's chickie? Yeah, whatever.
Part of what complicated the rollout was how it was marketed. A significant portion of the promotional energy around the album had nothing to do with the music itself. It centered instead around a supposed romantic relationship between Ice Spice and UK rapper Central C. The two have been photographed together online. The rumor was that they were dating and people bought into it. And then it turns out
nobody bought this, bro. Cinch would never date this hun, bro. We all knew this was a publicity stunt. You think a man from the ends like Cinch is going for Ice Spice? Come on, bro.
that the whole thing had been orchestrated to promote a collaboration. The record ended up dropping, and after the song dropped, Ice Spice confirmed that they were just friends. So the stunt had worked temporarily, but left a bad taste. People felt manipulated, and that feeling attached itself to her name. The issue here was that the music was being promoted with the help of a gimmick, so attention was being prioritized instead of lasting impression. Around the same time, there was some supposed tension with the rapper Lotto, a beef if you will. At the time, it looked like another industry rivalry, but it turns out that beef was actually fake.
What made me want to squash it? It wasn't a real beef to begin with, to be honest.
Which raises a fair question. If it wasn't real, then what exactly was it? Because manufactured conflict has long been a tool in the music industry to generate engagement and headlines. And then there was a situation with Nicki Minaj, someone who had really supported Ice Spice and collaborated with her early on. However, after leaked messages surfaced, in which Ice Spice appeared to refer to Nicki as ungrateful and delusional, the dynamic between them seemed to shift publicly. All these controversies disconnected from the music, the stage tension, the spectacle around the brand, the headlines, the public shifts, all of it started to stack up. And over time, it chipped away at the authenticity that had made her likable in the first place. Then came the personal controversies. A former friend and fellow rapper named Baby Storm had already surfaced with critical stories about Ice Spice's character behind the scenes, and that was followed by more detailed and more damaging stories from Cleotrapa, another close friend who had traveled with Ice Spice on tour. She described being made to carry her own bags while on the road, being denied a separate dressing room, and being refused the cost of a chicken salad by Ice Spice's team when she asked for food. She described feeling like a second-class citizen, tolerated rather than respected. She said she became convinced that Ice Spice didn't just dislike her, but actively hated her. Now, these stories mattered in a very specific way. Ice Spice's public identity...
She was mad because she probably wrote her own songs, bro. And Ice Spice... Who knows who's writing those fart records?
Had been built in large part on the idea that she was a girl's girl, a woman who uplifted other women, who was genuine and down to earth despite her fame. That image was one of the primary reasons her female fan base was so loyal. However, the allegations from Cleotrapa directly dismantled that image. And once the halo effect...
Ice Spice looked like the girl next door before she went into mainstream hip-hop, bro. She looked like that just pretty cute girl next door who's not doing too much, just minding her own business. Then she came, she ate some oats, started twerking on everybody, and it was all over.
Begins to crack, which it tends to crack pretty quickly. The warmth people had projected onto her began to disappear, and what was left was a less flattering picture. On top of that, her physical appearance had changed noticeably. She had lost a significant amount of weight, slimming down considerably from the figure that had been so central to her original image and sex appeal. Her audience noticed, and that's when speculation about Ozempic followed. During that time, she began posting videos of herself in the gym, content that appeared intended to frame her weight loss as part of a fitness journey. But instead of quieting the conversation, it intensified it. And while it's never productive to reduce another person to their body, in Ice Spice's case, her image had been so deliberately constructed around her physicality that
she reduced herself to her own body, bruv. It wasn't us.
Any visible change was going to register with the audience. When your brand is heavily tied to a specific look, a shift in that look doesn't just feel personal, it feels symbolic. And for a lot of fans, that change registered as the loss of something they had originally been attached to. And unfortunately, the music wasn't really filling the gap. The streams began to decline, the chart presence faded. The cosigns that had once come so effortlessly during her peak weren't arriving at the same pace. The industry support that had seemed constant started to feel quieter. And suddenly Ice Spice wasn't really around a lot of these very big names that she initially was when she was blowing up. And what's interesting is I generally didn't hear about Ice Spice much throughout 2025, which is crazy to say because at one point she felt unavoidable. It almost felt like the algorithm was deliberately placing her in front of everyone's face. I actually had to go out of my way to look up what she was doing now. In 2025, she released just 2 solo tracks, one tied to the SpongeBob movie, which she was reportedly cast in, and another collaboration with rapper Lotto. Outside of that, she was in our H&M campaign this year, and she eventually addressed the weight loss speculation, saying it was connected to depression. Looking back on the story of Ice Spice, I wouldn't really call it a failure. I mean, it looks like she's still getting some type of money, and she did reach a pretty high level of success in a relatively short amount of time. What I would say is that she was never positioned for longevity in the traditional mainstream sense. From a label perspective, the objective seemed pretty clear. Build a brand lucrative enough to exist beyond album cycles. Turn that name into a commercial entity, so they can then use that brand and make money through sponsorships, partnerships, visibility. In that sense, the mission worked. Ice Spice's name reached a level of recognition where she wasn't going to disappear overnight, regardless of what the charts said.
True.
But the music, the thing that was supposed to sit at the center, often fell secondary, and that order of priority showed. The image came first. The music was built around that image. And when an audience becomes attached primarily to an image, a persona, a moment, the high is almost always temporary. What sustains careers over time is something deeper, an emotional connection between the artist and the audience. That connection is of course built through music that holds weight, through authenticity that survives shifts, through an identity that doesn't depend on maintaining one specific version of yourself. Ice Spice came close to that. People did like her. People rooted for her, but the foundation wasn't strong enough to carry the momentum once the machine stepped back. And that's the part that a lot of people don't talk about. When the industry support cools off, an artist is left with whatever foundation they actually built. At that point, image alone can't carry you. Anyway, have you been paying attention to Ice Spice? I'm curious what you guys have to say. Drop a like if you made it this far. Subscribe if you're new. My name is Blackie Speaks. Nice to meet you.
Shout out Blackie Speaks. And Ice Spice, like, it was a good run, man. It was a good run. You did a lot in the short time you had. But every dog has its day. Not calling your dog, but I mean, you know, the saying says. But you've done well in your journey thus far. Now, I don't know. I don't want to be the guy to say keep going, because certain situations I'm like, you know, I like to be the guy of positivity. But then when it comes to Ice Spice, I don't even think she was ever really serious, bro. You know, like, she was serious, but then when it was time to really get serious, she played games, bro. And then she started with mean girl energy. Yeah, guys, don't put out bad negative energy like that out into the world, because it will find its way back to you, I promise you. All right, ask Cleopatra. She was treating Cleopatra like Cleopatra was nonsense. All right, now where's Ice Spice? We haven't seen her since 2024. Like, I remember her being on some Spanish record. That was the last time I ever saw her. I think that was last year. Was she at the Super Bowl? No, she wasn't, no? Anyway, who knows? Who knows what's going on nowadays? Like, hey, at the end of the day, I hope she makes a comeback. Why not, bro? Why not? But honestly, I just think that some people, they make it, and you can see that here you don't actually have the necessary skills to continue to have a long career and longevity in this game, because everything you're doing was twerk, bend over, twerk. They couldn't last forever. The real gon' rise and the fake gon' fall. Alright, like, comment, and subscribe. Support Doys and Blaze. Shout out Blackie Speaks.